Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So amongst other things, we're giving a different new microphone a try, so we'll probably debut that at the live stream this Friday, so tomorrow. I'm recording this on Thursday. So I'm going to do similar to what I did last week. I'm going to do a little hobby roundup. This week is a little bit less, I would say, newsworthy. There were some items that I'm going to go over quickly, and similar to the idea of the last one, I'm not going to spend too much time on any of them, but I'll bring up a couple of different things that you might want to bear in mind or that you might want to think about. Some things and some quick thoughts about a couple of them. So first of all, on the screen, as you can see, we're talking about the Nationals coming up here 6 days away from the time that I'm recording this. So we're rapidly approaching. We're under a week away. So that should be obviously be a big thing that we're going to get a chance to see what the content comes out of it, looking at, different cards that people get. We'll find out exactly, the speculation will end. We're going to definitely find out what happens as far as how the atmosphere ends up being over there in Rosemont and how people do in terms of their goals and trying to find what they're looking for and basically what ends up happening in the room itself. In that same vein, I do want to thank everybody who on the channel who has had the chance to check out my most recent video where I interviewed, kind of conversed mostly, but sort of interviewed Mike Baseball Collector regarding some of the comments that came out of the video he did with Bench Clear Media about the sports card market collapse, or the sports card collapse is the way they phrased it. A good conversation. It was just to get some clarification on a couple of items. I'll address a little bit more of it on the live stream, but just long story short, for the most part, the feedback has been tremendous. So thank you all for your comments, well thought out and great comments. A few folks were basically kind of inquiring, why do they need to explain anything? Well, part of the reason was, and it came out in the conversation, was that they were focusing in on a specific subsection of kind of the market, and the data and things they had in there were not unreasonable, but it didn't quite come off that way to everybody. And obviously the title was a lot broader and less specific. And then once you got into the conversation, they did allude to it a little bit, but not everybody caught that. And that was one of those things where even in the comment section of their own video, they kind of acknowledged that, yeah, we probably could have been a little clearer with it. So that's kind of the reason Mike reached out. He said, I'd love to talk to you about the Hobbypalooza thing, which is one of the things we talked about on the live stream, in addition to, hey, let me clarify a couple of things regarding this. So that's what kind of precipitated the conversation, and then we had it. And I think for the most part, it was useful. If you already knew, then obviously don't watch the video. It'll make it easy for you. But there were a couple of other comments on there that like I said, for the most part, very constructive and very good conversation. Again, thank you all who did take the time to comment. And we'll definitely address one or two things off the top of the show, but for the most part, it was very good. And I think for the folks that were less clear, it did clarify a couple of things. And for the folks who were already clear, well, then it just reinforced what you already knew. Now, that said, let's move on to the first of these stories. This one's already made the rounds quite a bit. That's why I say I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I do have a couple of quick thoughts that I want to say about it. So this one is from Sports Collectors Daily. We're talking about that PSA 10 Michael Jordan card that brought in a quote-unquote record $840,000. Now, to be clear, it was a legitimate sale. It was in the PWCC Premier Auction. Now, what really made it stand out, obviously, is that it is much higher than the previous sales have been going. And there was another sale for another one that sold for, I think it was $380,000, right around the same time. So it's kind of begged the question, why was it that this one went for so much more money? Well, obviously, in addition to the market dynamic, that if you really just need two big bidders that want to do it, this one had the PWCC, one of the little stickers on it that said basically it was a nicer looking copy than normal. It was a relatively well-centered copy, a clean copy, and basically, aesthetically, it just had a couple of things going for it that some other copies wouldn't otherwise have. And it's kind of a side conversation as well, and it could be its own conversation. Whether you believe in the whole sticker thing or not, that's a different component of it. What it really comes down to is that if you've got somebody who's already in that tax bracket, the question is, do you just want a PSA 10 or do you want one of the better looking ones? In some cases, that's worth a premium to you. Now, obviously, if you're talking as strictly as a collector and you're talking about just general quality and you're not looking for prestige or attention or whatever the case may be, in that very same auction, I believe there was a BGS 9.5 that sold for about $72,000. So you could have definitely had a quality card for a fraction, literally less than 10% of the price of this card on the screen here. So totally understandable that it would seem really out of whack with reality, but it is very possible that you just had two people that really just wanted to bid it up. And the individual themselves did show on social media that they had bought the card. So obviously, in the long run, we'll find out kind of what their motivations were. But if it was from a collecting perspective, it could be an investing perspective, but I find it very hard to kind of justify paying, absolute top of the market for a card that is available, over 300 copies. It's even if you have the nicest, quote unquote, nicest one from a sheer investment perspective, it would just be just as good to get another copy and potentially be able to flip that a couple times over. But somebody buying the absolute apex copy, or at least that we know of, there is some potential room for growth there, but you're literally going to need another buyer who's thinking the exact same way you are, and that gets very difficult to do. Basically, one thing I'll include, and I'll include a link to it in the description, is that the Card Ladder folks, as part of their show, they did actually do a nice feature piece on it. I don't want to spend too much more time on it, but they did do a feature piece where they talked about this in a little bit more depth. And like I said, this has made the rounds a little bit, but I just want to make clear that from considering the general market comps, let's just treat this as what it is. It's a bit of an outlier, kind of a special case. It isn't indicative of the general market for this card. It's simply indicative of there were two bidders who were willing to go to a certain degree. It is a nicer copy than normal, quote unquote, and a PSA 10 is kind of a spectrum. And for some folks, that is very difficult to get your head around. But the reality is that the very definition that PSA offers for its PSA 10 leaves room for a copy that is less well-centered than another copy that could be beautifully centered, and they could both be considered PSA 10 by the technical grade. Obviously, there's some nuances there with that, but just keep in mind that there is some room there where you could have that. You could have a quote-unquote average PSA 10 Michael Jordan that in theory should be worth less than a more superlative copy. And this is considered one of the more superlative copies, so I could see someone being able to justify for themselves where if you've got the money and you really want to feel like you have the best copy, quote unquote, then I could see why they would want to potentially pay that premium. It's the same way that would happen if, you know, the BGS 10 came out, or I believe there's at least a handful out there. That would be a card that would potentially challenge that or even potentially surpass it. Why would that be the case? Well, because people want what they perceive to be the best. And if they have enough money to do so, then that's a factor. There's a mental factor to this in addition to the common sense, because a BGS 9.5 that won in the same auction, again, you could have had it for a relative bargain. So if you're just shopping around for an excellent card and you want to, you know, get your best bang for your buck, in that very same auction, that probably would have been a better deal. But again, it depends on what your motivations are. Anyway, I'll leave a link to that card ladder discussion because they went into it in more depth. But just some basic thoughts from me on this one. So this next one here is not necessarily a big story on the surface. It's not a big company. It's not a big deal per se, but it's one of those things where I do still like to consider different things where it does kind of play into the current theme of consolidation of some of these companies. So Entrust Global Group acquires Southern Hobby Supply. Well, that is the parent company of Beckett at this point. So this is what's kind of interesting. So they've acquired one of North America's top trading card distributors. So under that same group umbrella that has Beckett, now you've got a trading card distributor. So there is some more of this consolidation happening. So like I said, Southern Hobby Supply in and of itself might not mean a lot to you, but it's been around a little while. And as you can see here, it's again, I'll include links to all these articles just so that you're aware. They have more than 100,000 hobby and specialty stores that they do business with from their home base in Nashville, and they've been around 31 years. So they do supply stores with trading cards and supplies. So it's one of those things where on the surface, not a big deal, but simply having more of that consolidation in the hobby space is something that has been going on. Obviously, you know, PSA and its parent company, Collectors Universe, has been making overtures, buying all these different, gobbling up all these different businesses, including, you know, Golden, including all the other business acquisitions that they've been doing and that are eyeing on, Genamint. So it's one of those things where it's just good to keep an eye just from the industry perspective, just to understand that some more of this kind of business transactions are still kind of going on, even for stuff that is a little bit under the radar that you might not be thinking about. Distributors are part of that chain as well. So it's one of those things just to bear in mind. So this is an example of one where this distributor is now under the Beckett, parent company umbrella. So moving on quickly, this one here is from Robert Edwards Auctions. And as part of their current auction holdings, they're going to have a SGC VG3 copy of the Honus Wagner being sold. And that's a case where, you know, given what we're talking about, let me see if I can show you the scan here on this one. A decent looking copy, pretty clean. It does have a speck there on the chin, or the cheek, I should say, of Honus Wagner. But still, obviously, you know, beggars can't be choosers as far as a card that has this kind of lineage and kind of history. But it's one of those things where it's going to be interesting to see if this card itself is a card worthy of potentially challenging for the very top of the auction results. I'll be very interested to see. Robert Edward Auctions is at least out there, and they're doing their due diligence and promotion as in order to see kind of if they can get top dollar. So this will be one of those situations where it'll be very interesting to see in the coming days what ends up coming of this one. You know, do we get a new record, or is this a case where this one goes right up there and gets pretty close? Another multi-million-dollar sale. It's hard to say, but it's just something to keep an eye on because this could very well be doing the circles afterwards, after the sale is completed. So this last story here is going to be a fun one. It's a bit of a callback for those of you who have been around on the channel a little while. If any of you remember, last fall I actually had Chris McGill from Card Ladder on the channel where we had a bit of a discussion about general hobby topics, and amongst them, we talked about Collectible offering shares of a 1953 Topps Mickey Mantle PSA 10. Now, obviously, there were a lot of implications about it. Specifically, I focused in, amongst other things, on the whole valuation thing and how it was a valuation that was kind of a made-up number based on a theoretical, PSA 10 for 1952 Topps comp, and all the weird machinations that were required to come up with this IPO price of 2.5 million. Well, the shares themselves were at that point then offered for $25, and we talked about whether that made any sense or not. We talked about what potential value there was, and I remember I had a little bit of fun, poking fun, and had a little bit of a rant about the whole idea of, even if, this appreciates, if it doesn't appreciate by like a ridiculous amount, then really how much are you getting out of it? And it was very funny. So what I'll do is I'll play a clip from that one for you. And then when I come back, you'll see that, kind of by accident, it was more just random numbers I was throwing out there at the time. You'll see that I actually got pretty close. So I'll play the clip for you now, and then we'll come back here and we'll finish off kind of a couple of notes about this.
I feel like if you have that kind of money, and the point that I made to Chris offline is if you have that kind of money, there are so many ways to make money in this hobby that are faster, that are more liquid, that you can control, as opposed to this market that is you have zero control over. You're sitting there locking up your money for 90 days. And if your card does go up in value, by the way, if it does appreciate, let's say it appreciates to $30 a share. Awesome. It's a $3 million card. You made $5 a share. Do you want me to bake you a cake and roll it in? Like, how excited do you want me to get for this? How many shares did you have to buy for me to care?
Yeah.
Like, it's not a lot. Again, when Braun can go for $200 and change to like $3,700 in a couple of months, like you could have made a ton of money.
So you can see from that, I actually got dangerously close. I threw 3 million out there, and they actually did receive an offer for 3 million. Late last week, but then they were putting the vote to shareholders. Someone else actually offered 3.1 million, so bumping it up a little bit more. So 85% of the voters, shareholders, voted to basically support the new deal, and the advisory committee agreed to accept it. So they were able to, in fact, sell the card for a premium over the original IPO price of 2.5 million. But as you can see from that, 2.5, 3.1, that's $600,000, yes, but you've got a fee structure and things like that built in there. So in reality, is it really that much money? So the end result was that the investors themselves would receive $29.88 per share. So that is a return. It was about a 15% return versus what the IPO price would have been. And there's only 2 PSA 10s for the 53 Topps Mantle. Now, a couple of things. Number one, I've made abundantly clear that I love the 53 Topps Mickey Mantle. It's one of my favorite cards, certainly, and you've got the one there on the screen there. It's a beautiful looking card. But the thing is, when you're talking about, and the kind of the fun I was having with the whole idea is that you're talking about making less than $5 a share. So what you did really is you took $25, depending on how many shares you bought, per share, and you locked it up for a minimum of 3 months before you started being able to trade them. And then when you were able to get the sale where you were successful, you actually made money. Obviously, in a market that's, that's slid a little bit, vintage hasn't necessarily been hit quite as hard, although it's certainly been hit. But you did make money. But at the end of the day, you made $4.88. And if you were a person who did the original IPO and held on until this point, you basically were sitting there for, 90 days. Your money was being held. And then eventually you were able to start trading. And I received an email where Collectible bragged about this. And at the time they were trading, it was a premium over what the shares were trading for. Obviously, if you're going to make an offer, you got to make it worth the while of people to vote to accept the deal. So you've got to pay a premium. But the thing is, the shares were only moving for about $27 a share. So in reality, you were only about $2 up from where you originally started. You had locked in your money and you're trading these shares, and the gains are marginal. How many shares do you have to really care? If you've got 10 shares, $20, is that going to do anything for you? 100 shares, like how much money do you actually need before it really felt like it was worth your while? Obviously, other than being able to tell yourself you owned a part of a 53 Topps Mickey Mantle and PSA 10, which now you don't. So I at the time I was struggling to find the value. And obviously, if you're interested in day trading, you could do worse, I suppose. But it was one of those things where, given the overall return, I just don't know if it was really a worthwhile endeavor, given that you went from last September until now, all those months, to basically make less than $5 a share after all the fees and everything was taken into account. I don't know. It just seems like maybe not the most impressive accomplishment, all things considered. But for Collectibles' perspective, they were successful. They were able to do an IPO and they were able to sell it for more. So, kudos to them for being able to pull that off and obviously making their fees in between and being able to make some money on that deal from Collectibles' perspective alone. But anyway, So that's a quick roundup of a couple of different things. If anything else comes up, we'll definitely address it on the live stream this Friday. So we do Fridays, 9 p.m. Eastern time, where we chat about different hobby topics and pretty much anything else that comes into our mind. Sometimes we have guests on, sometimes we don't. It just depends on kind of what we want to do. So if you're going to be around, feel free to come by and hang out. We do interact with the chat quite a bit, and it is a lot of fun. Anyway, so that's it for today. If you've got any questions or comments on any of these, I'd be happy to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll catch you in the next one.